Thank you, Dr. Berger, Dr. Fine. I think it most appropriate in discussing the Rabin assassination here at Yeshiva that we focus on the religious Zionist community. It fits Yeshiva, of course, and there are obvious, very specific and critical aspects of the assassination itself and its consequences that relate to religious Zionism. Yigal Amir, the assassin of Yitzhak Rabin, was a law student at Bar Ilan University, the premier university sponsored by the religious Zionist community. He was a graduate of Yeshivat Kerem B'Yavne, certainly a major Hezder yeshiva. He also served as an emissary of Bnei Akiva, the religious Zionist youth movement, in work in the former Soviet Union. In fact, our youngest son recalled him from working together in Ukraine. So in every respect, he seemed to reflect the major heights of religious Zionism. Moreover, he took credit for the assassination. He was proud of it. He has never regretted it. And his arguments for assassinating Yitzhak Rabin were religious in nature and echoed ideas that had been said at the time by a group of rabbinic leaders within the religious Zionist community. We don't know for sure. He says that he never got rabbinic permission. His brother, who was working with him, claimed that he did get, without mentioning a rabbi's name. But certainly the motives that he was using to justify assassinating the prime minister were things that were in the air. And I don't want to go into technical halachic categories, but the term rodef, someone who is a danger because he pursues someone to kill him, were used because the Prime Minister Rabin supported the Oslo peace process that was perceived as endangering the lives and the security of the Israeli people. The fact that he was prepared in that process to give land to the Palestinians meant he was then seen as a moser, as a traitor to the cause, and was actually called by some a bogade, a traitor. And he picked up all these ideas. In order to analyze properly the impact that this had on the religious Zionist community then, and with some speculation even now, we have to understand, first of all, a bit of the background of religious Zionism, because it is much more complex than people acknowledge. The founder of the Mizrahi party, Rabbi Reines, was seen as a pragmatist. He did not stress messianism. He stressed saving Jewish lives. Jews having their own state would protect the Jews who were suffering terribly from persecution and pogroms. He joined a Zionist movement that was overwhelmingly secular. That was a very dramatic decision, controversial among the rabbinic world. And he set the tone. Most people are more familiar with the name of Rav Avraham Yitzhak HaKohen Kook, who surprisingly never belonged to Mizrahi. But he became the figure as the first chief rabbi of Israel and the theologian whose ideas ultimately became dominant in the religious Zionist world, who was very different. He was explicitly messianic. He was Kabbalistic. He saw all kinds of messianic potential in the state that, of course, didn't exist in his lifetime. And his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who focused primarily on one side of his father's complex thinking, his nationalism, his messianism, became the major figure that the movement called Gush Emunim that emerged after the 67, the Six-Day War, in particular after the Yom Kippur War, which took over much of the religious Zionist world, was reflective of this different mentality. Up until 1967, perhaps even till 1973, the religious Zionist party, which even then was a merger of different factions, for those of us who go back that long, was always a partner, a junior partner in the government led by the Labor Party. It was seen very much as a moderating element, though there were obviously not all the members and the leaders agreed on each issue. It joined in accepting partition, and the decisions through the Six-Day War, it didn't stand as a movement, though some people did, for Eretz Yisrael Hashlema, for the priority of the wholeness of the land as a dominant theme. This changed after the Six-Day War, in particular, in many respects, with the Yom Kippur War, because the Yom Kippur War shattered the myth of the military invincibility of the Israeli army. And there were two possible conclusions that one could have drawn. One was that we have to rethink. We can't rely on the fact that we'll always have military superiority over the Arabs, which in a certain sense naturally ultimately led to the agreement, the peace agreement with Sadat in Egypt and the Oslo peace process. Another interpretation, which was the religious Zionist one, was, it's what the Bible talks about, Israel being successful and assuming it came from their own military might and not realizing that the success came from God. And the lesson of Yom Kippur War is that we have to trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have to trust in God to ensure that we keep the entire land and not just in our military. The one other element was very important, that this new movement, and I don't have time to go into details, I'm being very quick and superficial, saw themselves as the successors of the early secular pioneers. These are the new pioneers. We are the real Zionists. I heard an echo of it just a week ago at a World Mizrahi conference, where one of the Israelis literally said that. The secular Zionists were the old pioneers. Their period has ended. We are the new Chalutzim. We are the pioneers. We are the true Zionists. What happens when the assassination takes place? There's great shock. There's a certain amount of denial, which still remains, and I'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. Shock. No one believed that a Jew, an Orthodox Jew, would assassinate the prime minister. I remember being here in yeshiva, and since we're 7 hours later, Shabbat ended after the assassination had well taken place. We didn't know about it. One of the guards was aware, was on the screen, and even though halachically one is not permitted to pray for something that already has occurred, that it be something else, can't pray after the fact, my silent prayer was that it wasn't done by a Jew, and I'm sure it was shared by others. And yet, I must tell you, that night I came back because there were students having returned from studying in Israel and absorbing the mentality that was very much within the religious Zionist community, who thought that the assassination was a good thing because Rabin was terrible. It was a disaster, and something had to be done. I remember arguing with them during the evening. What was the response of the religious Zionist community as a whole? So I want to bring to your attention two articles, which you can read. One in English, to make it easier, on a book called The Assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, edited by Yoram Perry from Stanford University Press, is Let Us Search Our Path, Religious Zionism After the Assassination, by Professor Aviezer Ravitsky. And the other, written a few years later, I have it only in Hebrew, in a volume called Hatzionut Hadatit Idan Hatamorot, in 2004, called Rega Shel Tzmarmarut, Hatzionut Hadatit Lenochach Retzach Rabin, written by Yoav Shorek. And the articles are very different, and I'm going to focus on them for a moment. In Professor Ravitsky's article, as you could tell from the title, he focused on the moment of introspection, of trying to figure out what went wrong that took place in the first few weeks after the assassination. There was a massive meeting in Yerushalayim where elements on the broad spectrum of religious Zionists discussed the event and questioned whether there was some level of communal responsibility by the community for creating an atmosphere which allowed, or even worse, encouraged, the assassination. That was the first period. Not all of them responded the same way. I'll tell you, even here in New York at Yeshiva, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, of blessed memory, who was an ardent opponent of the Oslo agreements and who had led a rabbinic delegation that met with Yitzhak Rabin, was upset beyond belief. He was so disturbed lest someone had misunderstood something he said that may have played any role in leading to the assassination. He was beside himself, even though anyone who knew him knew that he was incapable of supporting any violence on any cause. Yet, another one of the Rosh Yeshiva here, who had spoken in a shiur about the possibility of Rodef being applied, didn't publicly said he didn't regret anything he said. He didn't see why that could have led to anyone acting. After all, there's a rabbinic way of speaking. Rabbis don't tend to be people of action, more of thought, of word, certainly not of violence, so he couldn't understand why anyone would think it play any role at all. That was the first period. But After a few weeks, it started to shift. Why? Because the secular community, particularly the leftist secular community, blamed religious Zionism for Yigal Amir. And that produced a reaction of denial. Why are you blaming us? Blaming the entire community? What's this collective responsibility for the acts of an individual who had less than a handful of accomplices? And if one understands that to a great degree, again, an overgeneralization, there are two Israels. Yitzhak Rabin reflected a secular, Zionist, Sabra, not very knowledgeable Jewishly Israel. And then there's a religious, somewhat messianic Israel, reflected by the changed religious Zionist community in large. And they had very, very different perspectives on virtually everything, on the nature of the Jewish character of the state, the relationship to the Arab minority in the state. It was very fundamentally different perspectives. And this, if the religious Zionist community was going to accept that it's the community's fault, it meant we're going to lose everything we stand for to those who have a different model entirely. That denial was expressed in different ways, some of which are even true today. The conspiracy theory. Even though Yigal Amir said, I shot Rabin, there were cameras we have a camera record of his shooting him. There are many witnesses that he shot him. His co-conspirators agreed they were part of a plot to shoot him. The conspiracy theory says, in the end, he didn't kill Rabin. And I'm going to take a 1-minute tangent because it just came up the other day, and I think you should be aware of it. One of the proofs, or the supposed proofs of the conspiracy theory, is that there are 3 wounds, or supposedly 3 wounds, 2 in the back and 1 in the front. Amir shot 3 shots, but only 2 of them hit Rabin. The third hit someone else. Where did the wound from the front come? He shot him from the back. And this was proof that there was a second or real assassin. So if you go to NPR and look for podcasts, there's a new book written a few weeks ago by a man by the name of Daniel Efron on the Rabin assassination. And he's interviewed. So there's one on Fresh Air, and you go to the second one. And in the second one, he describes, as part of his research, visiting with Dalia Rabin and asking her if he could get access to the garments that Rabin wore during the night of the assassination. He said she still had them. He said, I want to take them. I want to take them to an expert in America, in Arizona, and have him examine the hole in front. He did. The fellow looked at the hole. It said it doesn't look to be a bullet hole, but he can't be sure. Could I cut off a piece of material, put behind it some gelatin-like stuff that approximates human flesh, shot a bullet into it, and said to this Efron, it is definitely not a bullet wound. It came from something else. There are various explanations, but it's certainly not a bullet wound, which makes it much harder to maintain the conspiracy theory. Yet, a study that appeared last week of people in the religious Zionist community, and I can't speak for its accuracy, but I know it was there, said that 55% of the people particularly young people, responded that the official version of the assassination is not true. That's one form of denial. The second form of denial was that he really wasn't a religious Zionist. After all, he went to a Haredi elementary school. His family came from Morocco. The high school he went to, Yeshiva Chadash, is sort of in between, not quite from the community. I don't think a very strong argument, but part of pushing it away. And the third part, of course, was that it wasn't such a terrible thing that it was assassinated anyway. Now, not that many people say that openly, but it's in the background. I'll talk about Rabin's role in the Altalena and other things, and early assassinations that had taken place in Palestine of different groups. I can't go into the details. This is not such a unique event, etc. It's all part of the denial. I want to conclude, because I don't want to go beyond my time. I hope I haven't already. By saying what happened 20 years later. And so, again, the religious Zionist community is not one that has different elements. I should point out, even within the followers of Rav Kook, which is the dominant theme, even though most Americans whose religious Zionism is very different, pragmatic, humanistic, comes from the Rav Soloveitchik, instead, and Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, who I think Rabbi Carmi is going to speak about his reactions, is a very different one. But there are two streams from the followers of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. One stream, led by Rav Tau, Yeshivat Har Hamor, is a statist stream. The state of Israel has great holiness. It's a critical part of the redemption. And to such a stream, and that was Rav Tau's response to the assassination, it hardly mattered whether you agreed or disagreed with anything Rabin said. He was the head of the state, a state that has great sanctity, and therefore assassinating the head of the state is a disaster, it's unconscionable, etc. But there's another stream that stresses land, and the state is merely the vehicle of the land. And to such a stream, of course, Rabin, who is going to split the land, give away part of the land of Eretz Yisrael, the biblical land, and I'm not getting into details of what his policies were. They had to be stopped at all points. Yigal Amir feels to this day that he is a wonderful success. He did what was right, what was necessary, and accomplished his goals. My last sentence is that there has been a shift from the overt messianism that was around in the 80s, the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s. But I think one should not be misled. On Shabbat, I heard very fine Rav speak as part of the World Mizrahi Conference, part of this world, yet certainly not an extremist, who ended his talk by quoting a midrash about the nature of the geula, of the ultimate redemption, and this midrash describes the imagery of a gazelle going up a mountain. And when you see him from the distance, he's going up, and then he seems to be going down again, and then up and down again. And he said that's only because you see it from a distance. That which appears to be going down is a necessary part of the climb. And that's the image of redemption. And therefore, we should see ourselves as not just as Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, the beginning of the stirring of the redemption, but in the midst of the process. And even those things which seem to be going away are ultimately an illusion in the process that we are part of. So the notion that the religious Zionist community sees itself primarily in the process of redemption, and therefore they inevitably have a very mixed reaction to the assassination. They don't approve of assassination, and yet it may have been part of the necessary process of redemption, is what does remain. Thank you.